Welcome back, everyone, to Confessions of a Loveaholic. We have a wonderful guest with us today, Miss Shanila Sattar. Did I say your last name
Yes,
correctly?
you did.
Awesome.
Good job.
Point for Emmy, which is rare.
Yay.
Shanila Sattar is the founder of Flow Breathwork, facilitator, training, best-selling author of Breathe, a fourth-generation sound healer. Ooh, love it. Women's researcher, national speaker, and the host of the top 6 podcast, The Playground. Ooh, this is so fun already. We're going to have some fun in the playground. She's the creator of the Healing Arts Academy, where she trains sound healers, breathwork facilitators, and mentors aspiring healers in the healing arts. Shanila, thank you so much for being here with us. I am so excited to talk to you. Let me tell you why. One of the number one things that I have to help my clients through who are addicted to love, who are loveaholics, is regulating their nervous system. So I am not an expert in nervous system regulation. I just figured out that for me, yoga saved my life, and that is not an exaggeration. So I'm so happy you're here, and we want to take out all of that amazing knowledge and wisdom and share with the audience. So please, Shanila, tell us what is all this breathwork stuff, and how does it apply to nervous system regulation? Why should we even regulate our nervous system?
Well, firstly, thanks, Emmy, for the introduction and for having me on. We got a little chance to talk right before this, where I was learning about Emmy's work around deprogramming and creating safety within, trying to switch your way out of old situations and reprogramming yourself into new situations. And I was like, that shit is nervous system regulation. So essentially, what nervous system regulation is that your body is created with a set of nerves. Just in the word nervous system, it is a bundle of nerves that help you process information. So all of us have a nervous system, and some of us have a very sensitive nervous system, but essentially what we are is this antenna that is always trying to detect whether we're safe or not. So safe emotionally, safe mentally, safe spiritually, safe energetically, safe financially, safe socially, in all those different areas of life, we're always trying to detect whether or not we're safe. And so what happens for a lot of us is that we grew up either not feeling safe, or we misinterpret whether or not we're safe. And what that happens for many different reasons. That happens because of trauma, that happens because of our caregivers, this happens because of environment, societal context, it happens because of your own neglect of yourself. There's so many different things that we can blame it on, but essentially all of us have this radar that's pretty much detecting, do I feel safe? And if I decide that I'm not safe, emotionally, mentally, physically, energetically, financially, socially, in all those different ways, I'm going to behave in a certain way. I'm going to behave in a way that is from a survival state. So when our bodies are triggered into a survival state, we don't always make the best decisions. These are survival decisions. And survival mode, you may have heard of these things called fight response, flight response, or freeze response. These are very good things that we have as natural defense mechanisms, but sometimes we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode when we don't actually need to be. So for an example, sometimes you get an email and then all of a sudden your body feels really triggered by like, oh no, like I have to respond or this email, and your body goes into a sympathetic nervous state where it's essentially in survival mode. So a lot of us live day to day in survival mode, but we think it's just like normal stuff, like, oh, emails are supposed to trigger me, and this conversation is supposed to make me nervous, or if I experience this thing that makes me uncomfortable, I'm supposed to not be able to get out of bed for 2 weeks, or be able to like work on this projects or whatever. For different people is different things, but essentially nervous system regulation is being able to train your body to deal with discomfort, whether or not you're misinterpreting that discomfort. Like, is this email literally the worst thing in the world, or is your boss just asking for your draft by 5 p.m.? You know what I mean? Like, is it like the end all be all? But sometimes our body physiologically responds in a way, so in a way that makes us think that we're in survival instead of just doing regular things that feel uncomfortable, but it does not need to trigger our body in this physiological way. So in terms of when you said, you're working with loveaholics and people who are sometimes recreating situations situations and circumstances in their life over and over again, a lot of us respond in relationships from an incredibly triggered nervous system wherein we are acting out of survival. So we don't want to get rejected. We don't want to get abandoned. We don't want to be put down. We don't want to be told that we're wrong. We don't want an authoritative figure. The list goes on and on. So essentially, you're always kind of suspicious of people's motives, and you're suspicious of the situation. You're suspicious of like whether or not like somebody's trying to gaslight you, when yes, that could be true. Like it could be a situation where you should be suspicious and maybe someone is gaslighting you. But for the most part, we're used to misinterpreting situations. So we act out of these old habits rather than understanding like, oh my gosh, I'm behaving this way because I have a history of abandonment in my life. And so anytime I feel that my friend is going to, not follow through with the plan, or this partner is going to, didn't immediately text me back, my body immediately goes into this sympathetic nervous state that is making me either fight, flight, or freeze in a nutshell.
Absolutely love it. Oh my gosh, Shanila, you gave us so much there to unpack. I'm in awe. I want to talk about everything you just said. But I want to help the audience. Let's take it down to basics. Can you tell us what a trigger is? Because I see this, people talk about triggers all the time on social media, but I feel like most people don't actually understand what it is. Sometimes we're getting signals of safety, and there are other times, and I tell my clients this, like, when they're like, oh, Emmy, like this triggered me. It's like, well, are you actually triggered, or is it coming up for resolution? Is it something that we need to address?
Mm,
So I would love your expertise on that. What is a
sure.
trigger? How to recognize it? And I know what to do about it is like a bigger picture there, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing to like really come back to the language, because I think there are these like hot words where it's like everybody's traumatized by something, right? And everything is a trauma, everything is like a defense mechanism, everything is a trigger. And the truth is, like, while it is like a little dramatic, a trigger is literally anything that makes you uncomfortable. It's anything that solicitates discomfort within your being. So a trigger could be as small as a word somebody used, and you're like, oh my gosh, that triggers me because I remember my mom shouting that at me, and like I feel this is a trigger because like even though in this situation like that word doesn't have meaning, in my reception of that word, it might be a trigger. So I might just be uncomfortable. So it's not like somebody is here triggering me. It is that this is a trigger for me. So in another way, it's like you can have triggers that are sounds, scents, smells, words, situations, feelings. So it's really just like not limited to like, okay, here's the clean definition and this one's a trigger and that one's not a trigger, because it's based on everybody's lived experience. Like your life might have certain triggers, and you might be triggered by my light, right? Like you might be triggered by my plant. You might be triggered by my color of my shirt, because like there's something that you're experiencing in life that I have no idea is a trigger for you. Maybe you had a lime green wall growing up and it brings you back to like a really traumatic moment in your childhood or something like that. So if for the basic understanding, it's just anything that brings you discomfort. But what we're talking about when we say being able to regulate your nervous system or being able to have awareness of these triggers is that, is this my problem that I'm wearing this color shirt and you're triggered by it? When I just literally got dressed this morning, you know what I mean? And so like if this is your trigger, how is it that you can manage your own emotional process in the present moment by allowing your nervous system to calm down in moments when it feels like it's heightened? So all of a sudden seeing this color is making you like panic, panic because it's bringing me back. But like in this situation, is the reality that I'm like physically here to trigger you by knowing that this color was going to be like offensive and bring up a memory for you? Or is this something that is happening within you in your own internal stories and your own internal storytelling that is essentially requiring you to one, pay attention and identify that this is happening to you. And the second thing is to de-shame the fact that it is happening, because sometimes a lot of people feel shameful when they experience triggers. And the third thing is to flow through understanding that you have these triggers rather than forcing yourself to say, like, oh, I'm not triggered by this color anymore. Because if you are, then it is a trigger. It's not for me to tell you if it's a trigger or not. It's to flow through that experience of that there might be certain times where this green never triggers you again, or there might be times where it kind of halfway triggers you, or you might get fully triggered again at a later point.
Thank you so much, Shanila, for saying that. And you said something so powerful that I want the audience to really capture here around this trigger is for me. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. So when I say the trigger is yours, it means that it is yours to manage. And a lot of times when we have complex PTSD, we have histories of trauma, whether big or small. In the world of somatic healing, in the world of nervous system, there's like big trauma, and then there's little trauma, and they're categorized in different ways. But essentially, anytime you experience something uncomfortable, you have to look at your own response to that. Why is it that we get so riled up when somebody says something that we don't agree with? Why is it that we're not able to have a casual conversation when somebody's saying something that doesn't match our worldview or the way that we think or the way that we process information? What is that? What is it that I'm doing in this moment that makes me out of my body and making me act out of survival? So for example, this like green color shirt, again, if we come back to this example, is to say, like, if you're triggered by that, it is to manage what it is that you're experiencing in this physical moment. And the way that we do that is paying attention to your breath, because the way that your nervous system talks to your brain is through breathing. So whenever we feel a trigger, we actually hold our breath. And so the signal that our body physiologically gets is that we're suffocating. So when you're holding your breath, your brain does not get enough oxygen. And when you don't exhale, your body's holding on to more carbon dioxide than it needs to, which signals that I am suffocating. So literally on the day to day, we're walking around triggered when we don't need to be triggered. It's literally because we're not breathing. So if you notice, like, when something is uncomfortable or is discomforting for you, notice the way that you breathe. You'll notice that your belly's not moving, your chest is not moving. You probably are breathing from your throat, or you're breathing from like a lower, shallow chest breath rather than the deep oxygen that your body needs. And this becomes really like cliche, like, oh, just breathe. But essentially, a lot of the triggers that people experience is due to not being able to send signals from your body to your mind and to be able to interpret what those signals are in an appropriate way. Because when we don't have oxygen, then the whole narrative is like, Shanila really put this shirt on because she knew that this was going to trigger me, when like literally that never happened. So you're creating stories in your mind, whether there's some truth to it or not. Maybe I did know, right? Like, but like, there might be some truth to it, but our brain goes to like a more dramatic examples. It goes to a more dramatic narrative that gets you in trouble. Like, and imagine living life with such a dramatic narrative that like everything is happening to you, everybody didn't fix this for you, and it becomes this like kind of victim mentality, when yes, there are certain things that are incredibly triggering that happen in life, like big types of trauma. There's war, there's genocide, there's macro traumas, there's micro traumas. There's so many different things that happen in life. That's not to say like, oh, that's your fault and that's for you to manage, but there are certain tiers of things that happen that don't need to be such a big deal. But when we're walking around with this, like, without inhaling or exhaling, and we're taking in everything in such a sensitive way, because our nervous system, like I said, is a set of nerves, and it's essentially an antenna, and it's deciding that I'm not safe. So she wore this shirt to hurt me. She made this decision to make sure that I wasn't going to have a good time. She did that to throw me off. It's like, that's for you to manage, because if the evidence literally shows you like none of that is factually true. Like there's no evidence to show that like there was no, like malice that was, directed when I got dressed this morning, then that is for you to decide. So for a lot of us have a lot of these triggers on the day to day that are from stories that we've told ourselves and stories that we're telling ourselves in this present moment. So we're always thinking like, oh, that person didn't text me back. Like this is what they did, da, 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 because you know everything, right? And it's like, yeah, maybe 90% of what you said is it has factual like correctness. There is some basis to what it is that you said, but that 20% you just made up and you decided that that was the truth, and then you behaved accordingly to that truth. So if I wore this to like upset you and then you treated me that way for the rest of the time, like of course I'm going to respond back to that, not in not an aggressive way, but like I am going to respond to that. So that means that you're co-creating your environment. You're co-creating people's responses to you and with you. So everybody is responsible for how they're managing their triggers, especially when we talk about co-regulating your nervous system. So it's not just like your responsibility, it's not just my responsibility. It's like I understand that you just got triggered by this, but like my shirt is not changing right now. Like this is still my shirt for the rest of the time we're in this conversation, unless you want to stop and then I can change. Right? Like and then does that make me in my people pleasing behavior where I need to change everything because you're uncomfortable? Because then when I wear pink, you're gonna say I don't like pink because me, and then I wear pattern. It's like I don't like pineapples, and I don't like. Okay, then I'm in my people pleasing, trying to appease you for everything. When a trigger is really for you to manage. Like, is this something that is truthfully, like violently, harmfully happening towards you? Is this malice? Or is this something that I can reconfigure in the way that I'm experiencing it in this physical moment? So I'm not going to be able to like journal about it in this present moment. I'm not going to be able to like do like 10 different, ritualistic activities. But what I can do is pay attention to the way that I'm breathing. So when I breathe in into my belly, the diaphragm, so a lot of us are thoracic breathers, meaning that we breathe only into our chest. So on the day to day, if you're constantly in this survival state, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. You want to be able to breathe deeper into your belly, deeper into your chest, and then exhale fully so that you're not holding that carbon dioxide. So when you do a simple just breathe, like this cliche situation, when you like literally just breathe, you're able to you're able to trick your body, your physiological body, into calming down, into restoring, into responding instead of reacting. Reaction would be to get so upset that, oh my gosh, this happened, da da da, blah, 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 and she did that thing. I'm never talking to, like that's the reactive part. And the response, reaction versus response is to say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that I'm really uncomfortable, but I'm going to absolve her from her part because she's not playing an active part in this. What is my responsibility here? Okay, well, I need to bring myself to the present because this green is bringing me back to the past, is bringing me to a trauma, it's bringing me to a moment that's over there. How do I come back into this present moment that gives me the ability to manage and handle this trigger?
I love that. Absolutely love the power of responsibility. One of the number one things that I talk about with my clients is the power of accountability, right? Like accountability is different than blaming yourself or blaming others. Like, yes, horrible things happened to us when we were kids. Some people have little trauma, some people have large trauma, like we've discussed. Um, and what happens is the power of releasing the blame or the need for the blame, but then recognizing like I'm accountable for my life now as an adult, and then our response to it versus the reaction. Absolutely love that, Shanila. You're reminding me, you're bringing me back to my early 20s, where I started going to yoga classes after a really bad car accident where I couldn't sit in the car for more than 20 minutes without being in massive pain, and I would sit in my car and cry because I was commuting in San Francisco Bay Area and it was miserable. If anybody's ever had to commute there, you know that it's absolute torture. And what happened was I started going to yoga classes to this place called Dawn Yoga, and it was a Korean sessions. And what happened is they taught me something that I thought was ridiculous at the time. They're like, Emmy, you don't know how to breathe. And I was like, wait, what? you don't understand. That's one thing I am good at. I was born doing that. Hello. Right? Like I didn't know that I could breathe wrong. And I was doing exactly what you're saying, Chanel. I was a thoracic breather. And I can trace this back to a lot of different things. But one, I remember in my culture, in Latino culture, the women always had to have these beautiful Barbie bodies. And I was not allowed to have a belly. Okay. So, belly breathing, I remember consciously holding my belly breath in and started to breathe only from my chest to my throat so that there would be a flat belly. How ridiculous is that? So, what happened is I started hyperventilating. It got to the point where I would go to the doctor, and I was only 18, 19 at the time, and they I would sit in the waiting room for 30, 45 minutes, and then when they would put the blood pressure cuff on, they're like, "Did you run here?" We're like, "No way." They're like, "Your blood pressure is so high." They're like, "But you're so young. We can't put you on any meds yet. This is not normal." It's this they thought it was a random occurrence. Problem was I would never go to the same doctor. So for years, the doctors all caught my high blood pressure, but because there was no consistent record that anyone had, nobody caught on to the fact that I was not breathing. I've never had a doctor ask me if I was breathing correctly. They checked the lungs, but I could do my breath, do whatever I wanted at the doctors, but they weren't with me the rest of the time. And what happened is, because I was hyperventilating most of the time, it created a lot of health issues, created some massive gastrointestinal issues with major constipation, major digestive, just everything was a disaster. And it was very painful. I started having tachycardia attacks. I was sitting in the middle of class when I was at university, and it would get to the point where I was just sitting there minding my own business, doing quote unquote nothing, but my body was doing whatever my body had to do. And Shanila, I would sit there and I would lose my breath. I felt like I was being suffocated for like 30 seconds. And it would get to the point where I would like do that, and then like after 30 seconds I could go and like people would look at me like, "What's wrong with you, crazy lady?" And I would just sit there because I was like, I don't know what just happened. And it was really scary, but I did that happened to me probably around 5 to 7 years before I went to yoga and learned about proper breathing and belly breathing and
Mm.
helping my intestines, and it completely changed my life. So tell us about this magic of breathing and breath work and this connection between the oxygen of the body and the brain, and because it goes beyond just the brain not getting enough oxygen and us being a little bit irritable and us maybe not thinking. There's so much more there.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that I'm surprised to hear your story, but it is like such a common occurrence, like in a really disgusting way. You know what I mean? And it is, and part of what you said is like it's not recorded. Like we have so many histories of people saying this from their lived experiences, but there is not like a proper way that like we recorded this information. And specifically for women, and specifically for women who come from underrepresented, under marginalized, and underserved populations, there is evidence to show that we're less listened to in the medical industry. Our problems are, thrown away a little bit faster, and it's all just like, have you, like decided, have you thought about taking a bath? Have you thought about taking ibuprofen or Tylenol? Like, have you considered like, going outside? And while those things have its value and benefits, we're not really taken seriously when we're talking about these symptoms that are sociocultural, like this thing that you're saying, like, yeah, you didn't want to have a belly, and that was forced onto you, and this narrative was placed onto you from such a young age. You're not really able to understand it as it's happening to you, but there are long-term consequences from holding in your belly. So the best thing to do is like to look at kids, because they're, the most innocent, untouched. And when you look at children, and when you look at young pets that are just like chilling, relaxing, they're not breathing into their chest. They're actually belly breathing. So their belly goes up and down, up and down. And some point in the history of a child's life, there's a moment where they feel fear, where they experience a moment of unsafety, where they feel threatened, whether they go to school and they feel that, these kids are loud, or the teacher's not paying attention, or they have some kind of need that's not being met. That's when they, right? And so what do we do as adults when we gasp? It's a holding of the breath. So it's a natural instinct that our body has in order to make us respond to that. Because what happens when we gasp is that we're able to better focus on what's needed, and be able to make a decision about it in terms of survival. And so that's like the basic mechanics of the physical body, is that it is always detecting whether or not there's a tiger in the jungle. It's not like it's literally like taking everything like so seriously and so dramatically. And what breathwork does, it allows you to be able to tell the difference between situations that are just uncomfortable and situations that are dangerous. And a lot of times we're interpreting situations that are uncomfortable as dangerous situations. And so this is where we sometimes have a lot of social anxiety. We have fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of communication, fear of expression, fear. We have perfectionism, we have overthinking. Name the list of like psychological issues that anybody could have. It's basically we're unable to differentiate between something that's just like uncomfortable, right? Like it is uncomfortable going into a social scenario, and then like you don't know anybody, and like you don't know anybody. They might say something, but also it could just be like a completely amazing situation where you meet a friend, or you meet somebody, you're networking, or you have a good time, you eat some food, you listen to music. But we're interpreting that situation as the worst thing it could happen. Like everybody's going to be a mean girl there, everybody's going to like force me to do drugs and alcohol, and there's going to be people who are going to like be violent towards me, and they're going to like touch me inappropriately, or they're going to not like me. They're not going to like, so these are the narratives that we're creating. And are those in the realm of possibility of a social interaction? Yeah, it is. Like you can meet a stupid person at any point in your life, no matter like how safe you thought you were with that in that scenario. There, it's absolutely possible, but it's always detecting that as this like more dramatic and magnified, amplified version of that situation than something that is just uncomfortable. Like we're all uncomfortable going into this party, and it's like, there's a lot of people, it's loud, it's this and that, like there's all these different things. And so the power of breath work is helping you differentiate between those things. And earlier I mentioned like the response versus reaction, like reacting to things versus responding to things. And so oftentimes we're reacting to things that haven't even happened. We're future projecting, and we're also like protecting ourselves from a future thing that may or may not happen. So anxiety is essentially that, it's like it's a worry for the future of like what could go wrong, or what is the possibility of going wrong. And you're not wrong. Things are possible, but the likelihood of that, and like that being true in this moment when the evidence of that is not true in the moment, is what breath work helps you activate. And so in that same breath, I'm going to also say that there is difference between breathing techniques versus breath work used for healing. So there is a huge difference. So every time you hear the word like breath work, it is this like umbrella term that says like, change the way that you breathe, you'll change the way that you feel. All right. So like that's just the umbrella term. But there's breathing techniques, which I write about in my book, Breathe. There's over 200 different techniques. So different ones do different things. There's breathing techniques that help you with mood, energy, inner healing, grounding, for sleep, for cooling your body, for heating your body. There's all these different things, specifically in like yogic studies. That's where a lot of the written studies of breathwork came from, and pranayama, as it's known in that lineage of study. There is those styles of breathing that help you do different things, and connect with different parts of your energy in that way. But now, if we're talking about breathwork for healing, we're talking about actually triggering your nervous system on purpose. So you are getting into a pretty intensive breath work session that allows your body to experience this discomfort to the point where you're able to build a relationship with that discomfort. So if you're always like, and the thing is like your body will never really show you anything that you're not ready to handle. So it's not like triggering you to the point of no return, and now you're in paranoia, you're having, spiritual psychosis, and like it's just like too much to handle, your body will literally shut it down. Your body will also say, like, we're going to stop their breath, we're going to fall asleep. There's a lot of different protective ways that your body will help you dissociate in this practice. But also, as you're doing this breathwork practice, we're doing something called activation. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to get into this activation state, where now you get into something known as your flow state. So flow state is a deep meditative brain state where you get all the benefits of meditation, of subconscious reprogramming, of something known as this in between your alpha and your theta state. So in terms of brainwave language, to break it down for folks, you have these 5 brainwaves. You have gamma, you have beta, you have alpha, you have theta, you have delta. Okay, so you don't need to know all of these different things, but essentially, when you're awake and you're talking and you're in your conscious life, you're in a beta brainwave. So if we were to take a measurement of brains and we were to see what the brainwave looked like, it would look like a very specific wave. Now, right before you're going to sleep, you also have a different brainwave, and that's your alpha state. So this feels like between consciousness, but you could go either way. Like if somebody talked to you, you would be able to respond, but like you could also kind of just like your mouth feels heavy. It's harder to like open your mouth to talk, but your mind like formulated the sentence, but your mouth is like not going to be able to speak it. That's kind of what like alpha feels like. Now, theta is when you're in your deep subconscious. This is where a lot of reprogramming of thoughts, not only just mentally, but psychosomatically. Psyche, meaning mind, and somatic, meaning body. So body-mind connection happens in this theta state. So within the alpha and theta state, there's this sweet spot. It's known as your flow state. So as you're doing breathwork for healing, not just regular breathwork techniques, but breathwork for healing, you're getting yourself into this flow state where you're able to let go of some of these narratives that you have built, whether you know them as narratives or not. So if you are dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with trauma, if you're dealing with overthinking, perfectionism, people pleasing, and that's in my line of work, like that's like the core the core issues that people come in with. But if you are creating these narratives that don't necessarily exist, but they feel so real to you because your body doesn't know the difference between like this being like a thought driven feeling versus something that is in the present moment, you're able to untangle that in the theta state, in this flow state, without having to think through it. So I don't need to be guiding you, and like somebody doesn't need to be speaking to you. We can, like, this is a possibility. Like you can have guided guidance throughout that as well. But when your subconscious activates, sub meaning underneath your consciousness, so conscious things are things that you're aware of, and subconscious is things that you're not aware of. All of these things start to rise up to the surface. So you start to think like, okay, so you start to feel these different emotions that come up, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't really have social anxiety. I'm just afraid of rejection. And and why is it that I feel that I'm afraid of rejection? Oh my goodness, it's because there was this moment in time where I went to this birthday party and the kids, like, they all played together and they didn't play with me. And this happened when you were like 5 years old, but that memory stayed with you. That stays in your body. And so sometimes when we're doing like healing work, we're trying to talk through it. We're trying to do a lot of mindset work, cognitive behavioral approaches to this healing work, which has its time and its place, but the body remembers when it was triggered. The physiological body has that information of that moment in time when you experience that discomfort. So I don't have to know that this was a birthday party, this and that, da da da. But the breather, gets brought up into that, and so you're able to use the intelligence and wisdom of your physical body to uncast that moment. So in somatic healing, we also have this term called casting. So whenever you experience that discomfort, that right, like when you gasp, your stomach clenched in, your heart clenched in, your physiological body did something, sometimes it gets stuck in that moment. So you physiologically have to act out uncasting yourself. So that sometimes looks like, okay, I was scared. And then what would I do if I came out of this protection moment, oh, I would shake my body. So you see animals do that. You see animals shaking when they're cold and they go into the water, they're cold, and then they shake off. You hear cats purring, and that's a way to vibrationally align. There's all these different cues that we have from like other animals and other creatures on the planet, but this theory applies to our physical body as well, which is that we're wanting to also uncast from that moment. So breath work is basically the way to get to that moment of uncasting, because it is the language that your mind and your body can understand without you having to interpret it over and over again. So I don't need to interpret what was this moment of, trauma, and this moment of this and moment of that. Your body will just shake it. Your body will just say it. And because subconsciously you got to go back to that birthday party and you were just feeling really scared and alone, maybe you wanted to you express it with a voice, but you didn't want to sound ugly or cry because like whatever the reason was that you didn't get to vocalize that expression. You're able to now vocalize that, express it, whether it's through your body, whether it's through your voice, whether it's through saying it, without having to create so much like diagnosis and mental like attachment to like, oh, and then that person said this and this person said that and because now you're recreating like another, you're just replacing another narrative with another narrative, rather than like, what is the truth of this moment? The truth of this moment is that I've been holding myself and I've been protecting myself, and I don't let anybody into relationships, into romantic partnerships, into friendships, into business, da 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 da. Da. I don't do that because I am still in that birthday party afraid of rejection. I like, no one played with me, and so it's like, what is that frustration? And what do you want to say? Say like, I want to hang out. Okay, so now like that social anxiety narrative, as the person that you have this like narrative around, is mitigated by you just tuning into your breath, being able to see where it is that you feel. That three-part process I mentioned earlier, that identifying that this is what you're feeling, to de-shaming yourself, because maybe in your 30s 40s you don't really believe that your fifth, not fifth grader, your 5-year-old self is like still wanting to shake and like still feel some type of way about this birthday party, and you still need to cry about it. So you need to de-shame that process, that it's okay to cry about things in the past, and it's okay to go into that moment. You don't have to relive there, and you don't have to stay there. So it's that de-shaming process. And then the third part of that IDF is to flow through that, knowing that just because you deal with a trigger, just because you face it, it might return. It's like shaking is cool. There's a possibility of return. So flowing with everything just means that you keep a consistent practice. And sometimes we think like these magic tools like breathing or hypnosis or theta or this thing or that thing is like, plant medicine and psychedelic, it's just going to like solve all the problem. It still becomes our responsibility to be able to maintain that information, to maintain the energy, and to meet ourselves in this new version of the whatever realizations that we came to.
I love it. Thank you so much, Shanila. Everything that you're discussing is exactly what I know my clients, and for anyone and everyone listening, when it comes to the love stuff and anything to do with your relationships. If you are if you've ever been heartbroken, and if you've been through divorce, and if you've ever been in a toxic relationship, or you keep getting broken up with and you don't know what's going on, if you feel like your love life is kind of a disaster, the number one thing that we need to address is everything that Shanila talked about here today. We start there. And then we go into mindset work. It always starts with the body, because the mind body connection is so powerful. This is where magic happens. Like true magic is real. So we start with what I call the heart set, the mind body connection, and then the mindset, and then we move into skill set. And I bring this up because it's so important. So many people come to me, and I'm sure they come to you, Shanila, and they're like, just like, well, just give me some quick tips, some quick tips and some quick hacks. Like, how do I fix this real quick? It's like, hold on, hold on, hold on. It doesn't work quite like that. And so many of us in Western society were taught to upgrade our skill set pretty consistently, but we are not taught how to upgrade our connection with our mind, body, soul, and then move into mindset. There's a lot of personal development books out there that are amazing and they tell you about how to think. But guess what? If your body isn't like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. I don't care how amazing it is if we get up at 4 in the morning and then we're going to go jogging and we're going to read a book. If your body has some sort of fear and trauma around that for something that you don't even know happened, it's going to shut you down, baby. So we all have to start with the nervous system. And I love that you're discussing how many different I didn't know that there are over 200 ways of breathing and amazing techniques. Shanila, I am like in absolute awe of everything that you shared with us here today. Can you tell our audience how can they get a hold of you so that they can continue down this journey and move into their magic of regulating their nervous system and living a life of ease and joy instead of always feeling like somebody's coming out to get them?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is to just start by like noticing your breath, without needing me, without needing anybody. It's just like, okay, just to practice like observing your breath. The second tool that I'll give you is my book, Breathe. You are able to learn 33 breathing techniques that are for everyday use. So they're not really for specific, triggering your body, all the different things that we talked about in terms of breath work for healing, but they are techniques for energy, mood, inner healing, grounding, and for sleep, which are some of the big 5 ways that a lot of people struggle. And if you are interested to work with me or train as a breathwork facilitator to become a certified breathwork facilitator, you can head to www.flowbreathworktraining.com. And on that website, I also have tons of resources totally free for you to practice 7 days of breathing. You have YouTube videos that you can watch. There's articles for you to read, so you can start gathering your knowledge that way.
Thank you so much. And I just can't believe how much we packed into our short session today. I think we're gonna have to have you come back and actually run us through some breathwork
Of
techniques because
course.
if you're up for that, because I
Yes,
think that'd be great for the audience so that they know like, hey, for this specific session, like be in a place where you're not driving, you're not
I
out for a
got
walk, and you
you.
actually
Yeah.
do that. Because I think we need that. And you know what's so funny? And you were saying this about how cliche it's become of just breathe. But every time you said the just breathe, even though we were talking about it being a cliche, like my body actually was like, oh,
Oh,
okay. Like it gave
yeah.
permission to breathe. I was like, oh,
Exactly.
okay, let's do that. As silly as it sounds, sometimes we just need that reminder, and sometimes it's pretend permission, right? Because we don't need permission, but it's that little click of like, oh yeah, that is good. It feels yummy. Thank you so much
Of
for being
course.
on our show today, Shanila. You're going to see all of her details in the show notes. Remember, she's got tons and tons more videos. Go get her book, Breathe. Can we find it on Amazon?
Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Target. Yes.
I love it. It's everywhere. Go get Breathe. And I'm so excited to have you back on the show, Shanila. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Emmy.